Can you imagine the worst life possible? One filled with anger, abuse, torture, and eternal damnation? And if you lived that life, the question would become, how could you escape it? One game gave us a look into a dire situation just like this. Based on the original short story from famous author Harlan Ellison, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream told the story of the last 5 people alive on Earth. In this timeline, during the Cold War, the Third World War began to break out, and in order to manage the immense amount of decisions to be made, the United States, China, and Russia constructed 3 massive supercomputers that put the war into a stalemate. But after numerous advancements, the American AI, codenamed AM, gained sentience and took over the entire world with a distinct hatred for humanity, killing everyone except for 5 individuals, who would soon realize their fate would be the worst of all. In the short story, these 5 go on a journey to find food, told from one of them called Ted, who is the narrator. Each of them has been augmented by AM so they do not die even when starving and dehydrated, and also they can live forever. So for the last 109 years, they have all suffered endlessly under AM's rule in an Earth covered in wires and electrical equipment that all make up AM, with the biomes of the world being at the 5 prisoners' feet, and above them being a massive dome of computer parts and only some holes at the top that let light in from a now desolate Earth. And throughout this story, the 5 remaining human beings are subjugated to some of the most horrific and disturbing torture ever, including AM nailing their feet to the ground during an earthquake and ripping their tendons to shred, only to glue them back together, causing a month-long hurricane that the 5 must endure, constantly passing out and losing consciousness. One of the survivors, Benny, being so mutilated that he de-evolves into half man, half ape, and even the survivor Ellen, the one woman in the group, being forced by AM to provide sexual favors for all the others, with each of them developing major psychological ailments, including hallucinations from the unreliable narrator Ted himself. In the end of the short story, the survivors end up going crazy, learning that the food they had dreams of finding was in fact in the ice caves they traveled to, but that AM had tricked them and made the food inaccessible, causing Benny to fly into a rage and start eating the face of one of the other survivors, with the screams of pain causing icicles from the cave to fall to the ground. Ted, realizing this is the first time they have had access to weapons in over 100 years, grabs an icicle and starts to kill the other survivors in order to save them from eternal damnation. And when it comes down to just him and Ellen, he does the heroic thing and kills her, leaving just him alone now to be tortured by AM, who for hundreds of years turns him into something not even recognizable as a human being. However, in the game, the story is a little different. All the background characters are the same, but the ending is retconned some, and instead, all the characters are given a challenge to play a game for AM, where each must tackle their biggest fears and regrets. It's one of the most psychological games of all time, where you play through 5 different campaigns diving into the psyche of each of the survivors, their wants, desires, and regrets from their past lives. For example, in Ellen's campaign, you must confront a man who assaulted her in an elevator in a previous life, where Anne brings him back to life to eternally molest Ellen in her own hell. But in each of the campaigns, by either learning how to handle each situation and/or by doing virtuous things like in Nimdok's campaign, deciding not to do more experiments on human beings like he did as a Nazi scientist, then you anger Am and he will cast each of the survivors into a prison of pain, including cages with lasers constantly shooting at them or blazing hot ovens that they're eternally stuck in. And it's only by beating all 5 of these campaigns and forcing Am into a massive outburst of anger do you finally get the last sequence of the game where it's discovered that those long-lost Chinese and Russian supercomputers from the Third War have actually infiltrated Am and allowed all the survivors to trick and best him. And now it's your job to turn off Am's id, superego, and ego. For those that don't know, in Freudian psychology, the human psyche is separated into 3 main parts: the id, or instincts, which is humans' capacity for evil, the superego, or morality, which is humans' capacity for goodness, and the ego, which is the sense of self that moderates between the two. So in the end of the game, you must solve the riddle of besting each of Am's psyches. For example, showing your natural human goodness, which will destroy Am's id, since it cannot contemplate how humans would be so kind to a machine that tortured them for over 100 years endlessly. And it's at the end of the game that we defeat Am and learn that on the moon, 700 humans are being kept in cryogenic stasis, meaning that the human race has a chance to live on and thrive once again. But to me, the most interesting part of the game is the questions it asks us. And maybe the most interesting of all of these is, how can we escape hell? In both the short story and the game's narratives, it seems like all hope is lost. No matter what the survivors do, their lives are as bad as it can get, it seems. But while the ending of each is bleak, they both give us a sense of hope in a way. In the short story, Ted becoming a monster who has no mouth but must scream is an analogy to the fact that in the end, through all the pain he had to endure, Am too was forced to find eternal pain, realizing that it no longer had any humans to torture, meaning its meaning in life was gone. And in the game, we learn that by being kind in the face of utter destruction and torture led to Am finally being bested. If you were one day to be cast into this insane and unbelievable world made up by Harlan Ellison, how would you handle it? What would be the best way to deal with a life not worth living, yet one you could never end? A world that stripped you of all of your humanity and subjugated you to the worst life a human being could possibly live. Well, maybe even in the worst depths of our human condition, there's always something inside of us that can flourish, an eternal light and a fire in our souls that guides us to the good. In each of the 5 campaigns we play in game, only by making the courageous and righteous choices do we trick Am and escape. And at the end of the short story, Ted kills Ellen, freeing her from her eternal prison, even though he hated her before. It's the selfless and kind acts we can make as humans, even in the face of pure evil, that are what make us human. A propensity within all of us to do the right thing, even if for hundreds of years we see nothing but pain. So if by chance one day you ever find yourself in hell, either the Christian one, Ellison's, or even your very own, remember that there's always a part of us, a superego, that tends towards the light, and maybe the only way to truly defeat real evil is to show it that something else exists. Only by proving to Am that humans can be good in the face of unrelenting sadness does his evil cease to exist. So maybe if you want to see a change in the world, if you're tired of suffering, anger, and sadness, then you have to realize there's only one thing you can do. Be kind, be courageous, and do the right thing. And maybe you will still be trapped in that eternal prison despite all of it, but you will inspire or change the hearts of others, and lead to a world where 700 humans can still live and recreate again, or one where you know you did the right thing. A world worth living in.